The story of Ben Reilly, Spider-Man's clone who would go on to become the Scarlet Spider and the villain Chasm, starts shortly after the death of Peter Parker's girlfriend Gwen Stacy at the hands of the Green Goblin. It's a few years after this tragic event and Peter has started to move on and is dating Mary Jane Watson. Though lately, a villain who calls himself the Jackal has been manipulating and coercing others into attacking Spider-Man. For example, the Punisher's first appearance in any comic book is Amazing Spider-Man 129. In this comic, the Jackal convinces the Punisher that Spider-Man murdered his friend. The Punisher would have killed Spider-Man if not for his spider senses. The two duke it out and eventually, Spider-Man is able to bind the Punisher and talk some sense into him. It was the Jackal that killed his friend. Aunt May is with Anna Watson, Mary Jane's aunt, when she sees Gwen Stacy walking down the street and falls over from the shock. In these early Amazing Spider-Man comics, Aunt May was so frail and she had a weak heart, and any sort of scare like this would land her in the hospital. Don't worry, she's fine. Peter comes home from a trip to find Anna Watson waiting for him at his front door. She tells Peter that his aunt is in the hospital, but she is unable to explain what waits for him in his apartment. Peter runs up the stairs and is shocked to find Gwen standing there alive. At first, Peter thinks he's completely lost it, but his demeanor quickly changes to rage. Peter calls her an imposter and storms out. Later, Peter's friend Ned Leeds talks him down and tells him that Gwen's fingerprints match the ones taken at her autopsy. The Ned Leeds from the comics and the Ned Leeds from the movies are basically nothing alike. In the comics, Ned Leeds and Peter Parker work together at the Daily Bugle, and Ned is an investigative reporter. Everyone is beyond confused. They buried Gwen Stacy 2 years ago, but according to forensics, this is the real Gwen Stacy. She even seems to have all of Gwen's memories up to a few months before her death. This drives a gigantic wedge between Peter and Mary Jane. At one point, Gwen even kisses Peter and is shocked when he doesn't kiss her back. Not only is Peter torn, he's kind of going crazy. At one point, he imagines Gwen in the reflection of a shop window and punches it. And this whole time, he's constantly being attacked by a barrage of villains that have been sent after him by the Jackal. The Jackal teams up with the villain, the Tarantula, captures Spider-Man, and takes him to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge. In a turn of events, Gwen is there to watch. The Jackal tells Spider-Man,
"Don't look to her for help, Spider-Man. She's mine now, and you can't hurt her anymore. I gave her life just as I'm going to give you death by killing you the same way you killed Gwen Stacy 2 years ago."
This Gwen doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and Gwen actually hates Spider-Man. She sees him as responsible for the death of her father, even though it was Dr. Octopus's doing. But this is still very out of character for Gwen to be going along with any of this. Spider-Man is thrown off the bridge and just barely able to escape using his web shooters. Peter and Ned eventually come to the conclusion that Gwen must be a clone, but someone would have needed cell samples of her to clone her. Peter realizes that his professor, Miles Warren, would have had access to her cell samples from an experiment they did in college, so they head over to Empire State University to talk to him. Professor Warren tells Peter that it must have been his assistant who has been missing lately. This leads Spidey to investigating an old abandoned factory where he is attacked by the Tarantula. Spidey wins the fight, but he is cut by the Jackal's drug-tipped claws. The Jackal then reveals himself to be Professor Warren. Okay, that was a lot of preamble, but we're finally at one of my favorite comic books of all time, Amazing Spider-Man 149, the first appearance of Ben Reilly. When Spidey wakes up, he is strapped to a table. He bursts free and dukes it out with the Jackal.
You're probably asking yourself, why? Why does he hate me? Why is he going to kill me? I'll tell you why, Parker. I hate you because you're young. I hate you because you were loved by Gwen Stacy. And I hate you because you let her die. From the day I saw Gwen Stacy, I admired her. She was a good student, bright and attentive. Perhaps she reminded me of the daughter I never had. Whatever the reason for the attraction, I felt drawn to her, protective, fatherly. And when she died, something died within me too. I cried that day, Parker. Lord, how I cried.
The Jackal goes on to recount how the next day his assistant showed him that he had successfully cloned a frog. He then gave his assistant tissue samples to clone, saying that they were from a rat. When his assistant realized that they were human, he told the professor that they needed to destroy them, and in a panic, Professor Warren killed him. He then convinced himself that he didn't do it. It couldn't have been him. He created an alternate personality to blame for the murder, the Jackal. did the murder. The Jackal then cared for his clones and developed a costume for himself. The clone of Gwen was successful, and Professor Warren spent months re-educating her to reality. Somehow her memories were copied from the cell tissue, and he was able to bring them out through hypnosis, which he also used to control her. The Jackal then drugs Peter once more, and when he awakens, he finds himself in a stadium staring at another Spider-Man who is also just waking up.
Wow, I feel like I've been stung by a hornet. Huh? Who the heck are you, fella, and where's the Jackal? In case you hadn't guessed, Spider-Man, Gwen wasn't the only clone I made. I also made a clone of Peter Parker. That injection I gave you earlier removed some of your RNA, your memory cells. Both you and your clone believe yourselves to be real, but only one of you is, and only he will be able to free Ned Leeds before Mr. Leeds explodes. The bomb's diffusing mechanism is sensitive to only the real Spider-Man, you see, and the bomb's set to go off at exactly 1:15. Have fun, fellas. The two Spider-Men, each insistent that they are the real McCoy, fight over who will stop the bomb. Both are 100% convinced that they are the original and the other is the clone. Meanwhile, Gwen, who is watching in the stands with the Jackal, snaps out of her hypnosis. She calls the Jackal a monster and rips his mask off. Being confronted by Gwen makes Professor Warren realize that he is the murderer, not the Jackal. Determined to redeem himself, he releases Ned Leeds into the arms of the two Spider-Men just as the bomb explodes. The resulting destruction not only kills Professor Warren, but one of the Spider-Men. Gwen runs over to the surviving Spider-Man and asks him how he knows he's the real Spider-Man. Simple. Far out. Later, Gwen's clone puts flowers on Gwen Stacy's grave. I think it would be better for both of us if we didn't pretend to be the same people we were when Peter Parker loved Gwen Stacy and she loved him. I wish I could know you the way she knew you, Peter, but I can't. Because I can't, this is goodbye. Gwen's clone gets in a taxi and leaves. This isn't the last time we would see the clone of Gwen Stacy. She would pop up in the comics from time to time and plays a minor role in the Clone Saga of the 1990s, the story that I'll be covering next. She never overstays her welcome long enough to cheapen the death of the real Gwen Stacy though, which is one of the few permanent deaths in Spider-Man comics. As for Peter and Mary Jane, well, they're able to make up and put this all behind them. Peter Parker, unsure of what to do with the other Spider-Man's body, ends up taking it to an incineration plant and putting it into a smokestack to get rid of it. Only the other Spider-Man wasn't dead, and he would come back in the comics decades later with proof that he was the real Peter Parker. In the next video, we'll talk about the return of this Spider-Man, what he did in the years when he left the other Peter Parker alone, and who is the real Peter Parker. We'll also talk about the return of the Jackal, the death of Aunt May, and Kane, the failed clone of Peter Parker. If you want to watch that video, it's right here. Unless it's not there, which means I'm still working on it, and you should subscribe to my channel so that you're notified when it is ready.